Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Lucy, and my channel deals with the intersection between Islamic teachings and principles and modern day psychology, and the way that we can draw upon both fields in the most helpful way for us to heal, for us to move forward in our lives. So one of the things that I have been reflecting on over the past week is the amount of stories that we have in the Quran of people of the past, of righteous men and women, of the trials and difficulties that people went through, of the difficulties that prophets went through in their communities, of the family problems, and the lessons and the pearls of wisdom that we can draw upon reflecting upon these stories. And there's so many. We could look towards some of these stories of Bani Israel and the constant disobedience and the constant arrogance and refusing to submit to the and follow their prophets. Or we could look at the trials of the story of Yusuf and the difficulties that he went through in his life, starting from a young age with his brothers, and then him being sold into slavery and the trials that he went through in his life. Or the story of Yunus alayhi salam and him leaving his mission and leaving the people that he was meant to call to the worship of one God, and him ending up in the belly of a fish in the ocean, and the distress and difficulties he went through his story and experience. And what stands out to me is that we as human beings draw upon so much through people's stories that that's one of the ways in which we learn. It's one of the ways that we become inspired. It's one of the ways in which we see patterns in human behavior. That's one of the ways that we can relate to other people's suffering, that we can draw upon the strengths and difficulties and lessons and see how they play out in our world, in our community, in our personal lives, and how we can draw so much from those wisdom and from those histories. And it made me reflect upon the importance of not only looking back on those stories, but also reflecting upon that each one of us have got our own personal history, and how when we can become curious and reflect back upon our own personal history and our own experiences, how there are so many gems and pearls of wisdom and understanding that we can take from that can help us to understand our current difficulties, the beliefs that we have about ourselves and the world that may or may not be helpful, the beliefs that we have around the future, around our communities, around the way that things play out, that we, through examining our own personal histories and our own personal experiences, that we can actually see how in both positive and maybe negative ways it's shaped us in the way that we function, the way that we cope, the way that we are in the world. One of the things though I have observed is that sometimes people are really reluctant to do that sometimes people will say, oh, I don't want to talk about the history, I don't want to talk about what happened in the past, like that, what's past is past, I don't want to go back there. And look, there are some times when people have experienced really painful or difficult things that they're not ready to talk about that when things are very personal and perhaps very painful, that in order for us to talk about the things that we've gone through and the things that we've experienced, we really need to be in a place where we feel safe and when we're ready to do so. But sometimes, just generally, people can be reluctant for other reasons, such as they say, look, I just don't want to talk about what's past, I just want to look forward. And that's understandable as well. But one of the things that we can really miss out on is some really key understanding of why we are the way we are. Because again, we all have our own unique experiences, our unique influences, our unique histories that have shaped the way that we are, that have shaped the things that we struggle with, our mental health issues that have given us, beautiful strengths and resiliencies that we can draw upon. And we can sometimes remain stuck in certain patterns and certain behaviors if we don't go back and look at what's happened in our early histories. How has our experiences, how has our early upbringing shaped us into the way we are today? And what are some of those things that we want to hold on to? For example, we may have seen that we've overcome some really difficult challenges in our lives, and we want to hold on to that identity of being very resilient and perhaps being a survivor of really difficult experiences. But we may also see at the same time that there are some things that we've adopted, some ways of coping, some ways of thinking about ourselves and the world that are not very helpful, that when we trace back, that we can see where we adopted that, where our experiences led us to believe something which wasn't helpful about ourselves or the world, or the way that certain behaviors have led us to cope that maybe isn't working for us anymore. One of the barriers that I see to people wanting to talk about early childhood, particularly when we're talking about parenting, because parents have a big impact upon us around the way that we feel, around the way that we cope, because obviously that they're there from, generally for most people, that parents are there from the moment they were born. For some people, their absence is what's shaped them. And often people will say things like, I don't want to talk badly about my parents. You know, I know that maybe they didn't do the best job, but they struggled, or they did the best that they knew how. And one of the things that I emphasize to people whenever we're talking about our early experiences is, one, understanding that it can be difficult, and it can be painful, and so we want to go slowly and gently. But particularly when we're talking about the influence of other people in our life, such as parents, we want to emphasize that it's not about laying blame. It's not about assuming bad intention. So we want to put blame and intention to the side. Because particularly when we're talking about parents and perhaps other significant people in our lives, that particularly those who are caring for us, for the most part, a lot of parents and caregivers actually have a good intention towards their children. But majority of parents, I believe, don't intend to do harm, but often that they're doing the best that they know how, or they're doing what they think is going to be helpful. And so we're not questioning their intention, but what's important for us to look at when we're understanding what's shaped us and how we are in our present day life is the impact of those early experiences, the impact of the way that our parents were, the impact of things that were happening around us at the time, and understanding that those unique experiences have shaped us in very profound ways. And when we can start to understand that, we can start to make sense of perhaps some of the things that we struggle with. For example, when I've seen clients who are struggling with anxiety, for example, and we look back on their early history and we see, okay, well, with what was happening in your family, that there might have been a lot of chaos, or there might have been a lot of uncertainty. It's understandable that then you've then grown up with these feelings of anxiety, or there are certain things that trigger you, that when people speak to you in a certain way, or events, certain things happen, that triggers you into a certain emotional state. And we can understand where those triggers lie. We can then understand how that's impacting you in your current day life. And when we understand that, what we're doing is we're bringing things that are below our conscious awareness into our consciousness. And when we do that, it often can remove a lot of blame. It can often take us away from us feeling defective and say, oh, it was because of what I experienced, that this is why I struggle in the way that I do. And then we can we can understand the wounds that are there, or the difficulties that we have. Then we can understand where they've come from, and then what we need to do in terms of healing them, and how we can move forward in the most helpful and the most healed ways. So I want to leave everyone with this, of the importance of us looking back on stories of the past. So whilst we have so many in the Quran of people, righteous men and women, and their trials and their difficulties, also remembering that we each have our personal and unique history that we can, when we're ready, in a way that we can, and it might take over many years of slowly unpacking in a safe way with people that we trust, with a mental health professional or other people, unpacking what we experienced in a non-judgmental way and how that's shaped the way we are today, and perhaps identifying what are the lessons that we can, strengths that we can take from that, and also looking at perhaps where are some things that have left some wounds, that perhaps some emotional wounds that perhaps we need to work on moving forward. So I hope this video was helpful. I wish you all the love, peace and joy in your life, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.